Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. Medieval Cambodia. A lost medieval city was discovered hiding underneath the Cambodian jungle. Even though the city was lost, archaeologists had already known about it thanks to inscriptions discovered near Angkor Wat. These inscriptions are over 1,200 years old, describing a mysterious place hidden beneath the dense forest on the holy mountain called Phnom Kulen. Yet even with the inscriptions, nobody knew its exact location. At least, not until a team of researchers in 2012, led by Cambodia's Archaeology and Development Foundation, used airborne laser scanning to look for it. They scanned an area of about 140 square miles of unexplored, dense jungle. And sure enough, an entire cityscape came into view. I'm talking about roadways, temples, urban infrastructure, and hundreds of other ruins. It existed between the 8th and 9th century and may have been one of the very first capitals of the great Khmer Empire, called Mahendraparvata. It was probably abandoned just before the capital was moved to Angkor. But even though researchers have identified the city, they still haven't uncovered it. Unfortunately, it's so deep in the jungle, and resources are so scarce for archaeological projects in Cambodia, that archaeologists haven't descended on the site. It's still there, hiding in the jungle, waiting for enough funding and interest to be excavated. Number 9. Secret Inca City. In the South American jungle, archaeologists came across a secret city built by the great Inca Empire that had been forgotten for over 500 years. As you may already know, the Inca dominated the Peruvian highlands up until the very last stronghold was conquered by the Spanish in the year 1572. Machu Picchu may be the most famous Inca city, but there are hundreds more of them spread across the country. Espiritu Pampa is one of those cities, forgotten at the end of an old Inca road on an eastern slope in the Peruvian Andes. It's surrounded on all sides by cloud forest, so deep in the middle of nowhere that it takes at least 4 days walking just to reach the border. The only way there is by hacking through the forest with a machete. The ruins of the city sprawl in all directions, each piece of stone covered in moss, and most of the structures broken beyond repair. Thick roots have taken over the buildings, stonework has all but crumbled, and little vestiges of the city's once former glory remain. The city was first discovered by the explorer Vincent Lee in the 1980s. At the time, it was very difficult for archaeologists to reach this part of Peru because it was controlled by guerrilla soldiers. Historians believe this was the last stage of Inca resistance. When all their other cities had fallen, the remaining Inca retreated here to their most isolated fortress at Espiritu Pampa. Then, as far as the legend goes, a betrayer gave away the city's location to the Spanish. They then marched upon it with every intention of burning it to the ground. Instead, it was the Inca who burned their own city and fled into the forest. Number 8. City of the Caesars. The City of the Caesars, also known as the City of Patagonia, is a lost city that may or may not have ever existed. It's a major mystery because even though no one has ever technically found the city, there are plenty of historical accounts that talk about it. The accounts all say the city was located somewhere in Patagonia, in a deep valley between Chile and Argentina. It was prosperous, rich in both gold and diamonds, and almost impossible to find. One of the legends is that the city is surrounded by an impenetrable fog that keeps it hidden from weary explorers. There's also a legend that says the city will remain hidden until the end of time as a safe haven for the native people of South America, who were so terribly wronged at the hands of the Spanish conquistadors. Now you're probably getting Atlantis or Shangri-La vibes here. And while it's true there are no records of people seeing the city with their own eyes, there are dozens of accounts of Spanish conquistadors and explorers hearing rumors of the city. It is now known as the Invisible City of South America. It's apparently accessible through a small pathway between two enormous mountains. But despite how hard people have searched for the past 500 years, the city itself, or confirmation of its previous existence, has still never been found. Do you think the City of the Caesars will ever be discovered? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 7. Palenque. Palenque can be found in the foothills of the Chiapas state in Mexico. Over 1,400 years ago, it was an important Maya city and a fortified stronghold deep in the untamable jungles. It was the capital and the southernmost region of what is now Mexico, a much denser and more wild area than other parts of the Maya kingdom. And even though the rulers of Palenque controlled a massive territory and had alliances with other cities like Tikal, life here was very different. When we think of the Maya civilization, we tend to think of one group of people. But the truth is that each city and each territory was unique, with its own king and its own social structure. The first king of Palenque was Kuuk Palam I in 431. The most famous, perhaps, was Kiinich Janab Pakal I, aka Pakal the Great. It was Pakal the Great who created a dynasty which would last for 4 generations and see the city reach its highest point of prosperity before suddenly collapsing and being abandoned around the year 800. After the fall of the Maya Empire, Palenque was lost in the deserted jungle for over 1,000 years. Number 6. Polonnaruwa. Polonnaruwa was built as the second capital of a great empire in Sri Lanka after the destruction of the city of Anuradhapura in the year 993. It was initially built as a temporary royal residence, but grew in the 10th century and became the capital of the Chola Dynasty. Not those Cholas, different Cholas. This was short-lived. In the year 1070, the king of the Sinhalese kingdom conquered the city and exiled the Cholas. They then used it as their own capital for the next 300 years. In the 12th century, mass building projects were undertaken and the city grew even larger. Palaces, monuments, beautiful parks and gardens. Even today, the preserved ruins of many of these places still stand, as well as enormous Buddhist sculptures that once decorated the city. One of the greatest monuments in Polonnaruwa is a sacred structure called Jadije, which still houses a massive headless Buddha statue. In the year 1214, the jungle city was destroyed. An invasion by the South Indian Arya Chakravarti dynasty and its warlord, King Kalinga Maga, saw the city burn to the ground. This resulted in the Buddhist civilization of North Sri Lanka being utterly destroyed. Number 5. Guayabo de Turrialba. One of the most significant ancient places in Costa Rica is Guayabo de Turrialba. It's a mysterious city in the jungle that was declared a national monument by the government in 1973. What makes this unique and historically significant place so mysterious? The people who built this lost city left no evidence of who they were or what they were called, and so archaeologists don't even have a name for them. All we have is archaeological evidence from the site revealing it was inhabited around the year 1000 BC, or at the same time the city of Jerusalem was founded. It peaked about 2,000 years later in the 9th century AD, with a population of around 10,000. That would have made it the biggest and most important regional center of politics, culture, and religion in all of Costa Rica. Based on other archaeological evidence, there is nothing to suggest that people who lived here were a warring society like the Maya or the Aztec, or that they practiced human sacrifice. Great monuments reveal that they were likely ruled by chieftains, a primary authority figure important enough to demand that people build great works of stone in commemoration of their rule. But the story of Guayabo de Turrialba ends around 1400 AD, before the Spanish conquistadors ever arrived. For an unknown reason, these mysterious people vanished into the jungle and abandoned their city. It was only rediscovered hundreds of years later in the 19th century, and since then, only a small portion of it has been excavated because it is so remote. Number 4. Wieng Kum Kam. In the year 1288, the great King Mangrai of what is today Thailand relocated the capital of the ancient Lana Kingdom from where it had been in Chiang Rai to Wieng Kum Kam, located on the banks of the Ping River. This was before the current Thai kingdom, and even before the Kingdom of Siam. But by the year 1296, the king realized he had made a huge mistake in choosing the location of his new city. Being on the riverside did have some advantages, but the area was prone to seasonal flooding. He had no choice but to create a new city, which would become the modern tourist capital of Chiang Mai. Perhaps you've heard of it, or maybe you've even been there. Let me know in the comments. With Wieng Kum Kam abandoned, it became the victim of annual flooding for 700 years. This buried the lost city in the jungle several feet underground. It wasn't rediscovered until 1984, when a collection of ancient tablets were uncovered about 2 miles from the metropolitan area of Chiang Mai. Archaeologists moved in and started excavating and were shocked to find the ancient lost city. Since its initial discovery, over 30 archaeological sites have been found in Wiang Kum Kam. Even though it had only been a major capital for a decade, the Lana still managed to build temples, enormous wats, which are monasteries or temples, and suburban neighborhoods. It was spread out across a massive patch of jungle alongside the river, so big that you can't even cover the whole place on foot. The only way to see all of Wiang Kum Kam today is by bicycle or tuk-tuk. Number 3. El Pilar. El Pilar is an ancient Maya city on the border of Belize and Guatemala, an amazing place filled with houses, temples, and monumental pieces of ancient architecture. It was first documented by archaeologist Anabel Ford in 1983. She worked closely with local Maya descendants to map the area and perform the first excavations. It was the very first time people had taken an interest in the jungle ruins, since they were abandoned around 1,000 years ago. Before this great city was abandoned, it was a major gathering place for 1,300 years. Nestled in the forest, surrounded by a natural environment, El Pilar's golden years were between 500 and 1000 AD. But much like other places in the Maya kingdom, the rulers practiced extensive agriculture and slash-and-burn methods, ultimately tearing the land apart. Even though their agriculture was nothing compared to our modern agriculture, 500 years of abuse really did a number on the jungle. When the empire started collapsing in the year 900, El Pilar lasted quite a bit longer than many other cities because of its remote location. But it did eventually fall. The people left, and it was abandoned to be consumed by the surrounding jungle. Number 2. Kota Gelanggi. Kota Gelanggi is a lost Malaysian city discovered less than 2 decades ago, in 2005. Archaeologists believe it was established around the year 650 by one of the oldest kingdoms to ever live on the Malay Peninsula. This site is in the sweltering jungles of southern Malaysia, inside a forest reserve. The earliest modern mention of the city goes back to the 17th century, when local historians described it as a fortress rendered of black stone. But we don't actually know who built the city or what happened to them. Some historians say it was part of the Ayutthaya Kingdom of Thailand, since it's mentioned so much in Siamese folklore. Inscriptions have been found detailing a raid on the city in 1025 by the Chola Dynasty of Sri Lanka I told you about. But in the end, it's all quite vague and mysterious. Fast forward to the year 1881, and colonial visitors spoke of a mysterious city hiding somewhere in the jungle. Although there were some vague reports of explorers coming across it, nothing was ever confirmed. In the 1920s, Sir Richard Olof Winstedt wrote that the local Orang Asli indigenous group was prepared to take him to the ancient city, but it never happened. The topic was forgotten, the dense forest became a preserve, and it wasn't officially found until 2005. But even now, the discovery has been controversial. It was only technically discovered using aerial inspections, topographical surveys, and from assessing local folklore. Nobody has seen the stone blocks of the city with their own eyes, but assume it's there based on satellite evidence. Number 1. Cities of the Amazon. Anthropologist Michael Heckenberger with the University of Florida recently teamed up with the local Cuicuro people of Brazil's Mato Grosso state to look for lost cities in the Amazon jungle. To everyone's surprise, Michael found over 28 towns and villages that could have together supported about 50,000 people. He and his team searched over 7,700 square miles of dense forest, an area about the size of New Jersey. They uncovered the remains of houses, giant plazas, wooden palisades, defensive ditches, old ceramic cooking utensils, and even roads carved through the jungle. This was one of the biggest studies involving lost Amazonian cities that has ever been done. Many of the cities were abandoned as recently as 400 years ago. The research was a mixture of boots on the ground and satellite images, which when put together reveal a complex society of humans living inside the jungle. The oldest remains appear to be about 1,500 years old, meaning the Amazon was far more advanced than anyone had ever imagined. For about 1,000 years, various villages were connected by major roads, with smaller settlements dotting the spaces between. There were bridges, harbors built on great rivers, and fields used for growing local Amazonian foods. Archaeologists have dubbed these lost settlements garden cities. But there's still a lot of mystery. For example, we don't know why people began moving away from these urban jungle metropolises. It seems that about 400 years ago, they simply stopped being used. The people migrated to the more modern cities nearer to the coast, and life in the jungle was essentially given up by the majority of society. Thanks for watching! Which of these incredible lost cities surprised you the most? Which one do you want to see in real life? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to hit that subscribe button and come back soon for more awesome videos. See you later! Bye!